Channel 2 and Frankenstein on Channel 9. You're gonna be a superstar. A superstar. Good morning, folks. A very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. So listen, I got a little sidetracked last evening. I started playing Civ with my wife and drinking whiskey, and all my points went to shit. So, figured a large cup of coffee, very large cup of coffee, and a brand new day might sort out that problem. Did anybody else get iOS 14, man? I hate when I have to spend like a good part of my day learning to use my phone again. Ugh. So, listen. I wanted to explore a concept. I think, last time I had to do this, I worked through the allocation of resources thing, which was basically, it took several streams to get there. But I knew that I was picking away at something, and finally figured out what it was, which was that society is making choices, right? We are making choices actively as a society to allocate resources in a particular way. Resources including money, healthcare, education, all these things that should be public goods. We are relying on essentially crony capitalism to decide who receives the benefits. And that allocation of resources argument actually goes back to the OGs, the Pilgrims, right? Because, well, and early Reformation movements in this country, religious Reformation movements, which, in the absence of the social nature of the church, right? Because you have to imagine that under feudalism and the Church of England, your existence was determined by your relationship to God, right? And when people packed up and left the Church of England in a huff, they abdicated that relationship as it was perceived to them before. And so the fallout of that was, here, hold on, I'm gonna move this a little bit. The fallout of that was that they replaced the engine with which they were measuring themselves success-wise and where they should be in the hierarchy of society. They were replacing God's dominion in that with manifest destiny and the new world, and building some sort of place in the new society they found themselves in. And so it mutated itself into this feeling of, well, if you work hard and you are successful, then that is God's will. And so you have been shown upon, more gracefully than other people because you are in favor with God. And it would take several hundred years But that ended up becoming the prosperity gospel, and the weird mutated form of popular Christianity that we have today, which is how nice can you dress to go to church, right? And allowing capitalism and continuous expansionism to slither in to religion created this dynamic where if I'm well off, it is because God favors me. If you are not well off, well, then I feel bad, and I hope that God favors you one day. But there is nothing that I should do to fix that, because it's God's will that you're poor, or it's God's will that you, are sick, or you work on you work with mercury all day and you're gonna die of cancer when you're like 27. And that deeply, deeply, deeply embedded itself in the American psyche, because now it's just understood, except we don't relate that to God per se, because we are largely a secular society at this point, like most developed nations. There are, of course, people who conflate the Constitution with the Ten Commandments or whatever, as if they were handed down by God and are completely immovable. But that concept manifests itself in full in today's capitalist society, because we look at people who are homeless, or we look at people who are poor, or who have a job that particularly sucks, or are working in the gig economy delivering us $50 hamburgers. We look at them with, and the left is particularly guilty of this, with a pity, right? With an idea of like, well, I wish it wasn't like that for you. But unfortunately, God, which in our case is the market, the stand-in for that is the market. But the market has decided that this is what you're worth. You're worth $8 an hour behind the counter at McDonald's. Or you're worth $8 an hour, 5-year-old man greeting people at Walmart. Because we have made the collective decision as a society that... my internet went out. I disappeared. I went away. All right, I'm back. Yeah, so we've made the collective decision as a society that the market will dictate your position. Now, that's not actually backed up by any sort of factual information or real life anything, because it's really just dependent on who who you were born to, where you were born. I mean, it's largely socioeconomic on what's going, on whether or not you're going to be successful. It's especially for young people in our society, millennials and younger, because they essentially, you have this fire beast, like Smaug like generation of the boomers who grabbed the wealth and capital and profits of industrialization post World War II and sat on them or squandered them so callously and without concern for any other people in this country for decades. And in the meantime, lobbied to cut their taxes, pull the rope up behind, pull the ladder up behind them, And that generation has completely screwed every other generation that lives in this country. That is why we okay boomer them to death, because people know, right? People know that that's the problem. They know that the hoarding Smaug-like of wealth done by the boomers has led to their complete I don't even know, like, the complete corruption of American economics and society. But yeah, this is all based in this like hierarchical, divine almost belief in the market and how the market will always provide, and the market is always going to be the savior of us all. If the market has deemed that you live in a nice house, then that's because you were good to the market, and that's because you were valuable, right? It's the same concept that was employed under feudalism to explain to people why a certain subsection of folks were living in a castle with a warm fire to sit by in the winter, and the rest of them were sitting in mud holes. There has to be a justification. I'm fascinated by the idea that there is a story that each system has to tell. I think I've talked about Anand Giridhar before in his book on the stream, but he goes through this story of like he goes through this framework of like leaders have to tell a story in order to maintain the system in which they live, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to people and they aren't happy with it. And so the point that he's basically making is when you had, you know, your dynastic leadership in, you know, ancient China, or the Romans, or with Caesar, the kings and queens of Europe, or even tribal leadership throughout the world, way back. The story there was, I have spoken to God, or I have been visited by God, or I have had a vision that I should be, that I have some sort of connection with the divine, and therefore I should be the leader of people because I am the closest to God, and God has deemed me the most worthy to rule over you. Now, it helped that most of those people gained that power through abject violence and murder, and already having enough wealth and power beforehand to make that argument more compelling. That surely helped, of course. But these governments were able to maintain themselves for such a long period of time. I mean, there are some dynasties, you know, I mean, there are some systems of government, feudalism comes to mind, that sustained themselves for such a long time because they told a compelling story. You know, they said, look, the world is hard out there. And you're talking about people under feudalism that had been through really, really rough shit. You know, like smallpox outbreaks, the plague, actual barbaric wartime that, you know, killed their family members, burned their lands, left them with nothing. And when somebody comes along and says, hey, yeah, this sucks, right? Like, being a human being sucks. But it turns out, I talked to God, and that guy said, if you put me in charge, then I can stop all this shit. That's why when governments are changed, right? When governments are changed, there is a period of revolution, and there's a period of distrusting government because people stop buying into the story. And the story that we live under now, that is quickly falling apart and is not able to sustain itself, clearly. The story that we live under now is that American capitalism creates a market over the top of everyone. And that market through sheer force of will, through popular government, because it's assumed that because we have a market, the population is making the decisions within that market, that the free market will determine the worth of each individual citizen. If you are valuable to society, then you will be a CEO or a Wall Street banker or president or a senator or whatever, because you yourself hold some sort of divine value in the eyes of the market that no one else possesses. And the reason that this is falling apart now is because of Trump. And I don't mean he did it. I just mean that people cannot reconcile those two subconscious thoughts. They cannot reconcile the fact that the president is the, highest office in the land, leader of the free world. Every other president before him, especially Obama, regardless of how you feel about him, was assumed to have either been born into a great American family like the Bushes or the Clintons or the Kennedys, and therefore was close enough to what the market had deemed awesome to be president, or you had people who were deemed, and this is modern American presidents. I mean, obviously, early on, not so much the case, but still, I mean, it's a dynamic that still existed. And the idea was, with all of these guys, Obama's a perfect illustration of this, was, look, this is a guy that became a, the president of the Harvard Law Review, that graduated from Harvard, at the top of his class, was a very successful lawyer, worked very hard to learn constitutional law, taught constitutional law, ended up working working as a senator, then became the president. I mean, look at this guy. And he's a black guy. So, wow, he really, the market must really, because we all know in our heart of hearts that it's harder for black people to ascend that way, of course, because this is America. And in our country's mind's eye, we all saw that and went, oh, well, this guy must really be valuable. This guy must really mean something to the market, because, damn, he ascended from a single parent home, black kid, to become the president. And a lot of liberals and a lot of Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden voter types looked at that as excelling in the meritocracy. That all that really mattered was how hard you would work, how much of yourself you would give to the system, and being able to adjust the levers of power here, there, and everywhere to instead of standing on people's throats, to convince them to put their hands out like this and boost you up to the top, right? Which the difference between those two actions, there's a fly in here, the difference between those two actions is fairly negligible and pretty meaningless, because you're still using other people to get to this meritocratic achievement that in society's eyes makes you one with the divine will of the free market, right? This is why people have brainworms about Jeff Bezos. It's because it's hard to reconcile the fact that Jeff Bezos is just an idiot that got lucky. Mark Zuckerberg, idiot, got lucky. Elon Musk, idiot, got lucky. Mark Cuban, idiot, got lucky. These people at the tippy top of our society with billions of dollars, right? When you start to talk to regular, just average, everyday Americans about, like, hey, don't you think it's bad that we have allocated resources in such a way that Jeff Bezos has $200 billion? Like, does that bother you? Doesn't that bother you? We've talked about before, like, it's $80 billion to end homelessness. And Jeff Bezos is personally worth $200 billion. But people cannot have that conversation. They cannot reconcile those things because they have the market brainworm, which is like, well, if he's worth 200 billion, it's because he's worth 200 billion. The market has deemed that. The free market has spoken. And this problem is getting even worse. I'll get back to Trump in a second. This problem is getting even worse in the internet age, because the internet does an even better job, or not better, but an even more efficient job of figuring out who is worthy of the assets of society and the attention of the people, because you can quantify it with likes and comments and shares and views and follows and whatever the hell. And so if somebody has 100 million followers on a platform, then they have been deemed by the internet, which on its face has more of a veneer of democracy to it because everybody's on the internet. It has a more efficient way of telling people, like, look, the market has deemed this person worthy, and that gets me to Trump. People are having trouble. This is why you see such a fracturing. It's one of the reasons why you see such a fracturing between people who like Trump and people who do not. And the way that our voting population, not our actual population, but our voting population, which is a cadre of particularly well-off, particularly middle class, or no, particularly upper middle class to upper class people who largely live in the suburbs or urban areas. And if they're urban areas, they are like the Upper East Side of Manhattan and stuff. Mostly well-off people that consistently vote, not just for president, but other offices and local boards and in local elections and stuff like that. There is a fracturing between our voting population, between people who like Trump and people who don't. And the reason for this is people who don't like Trump cannot understand anymore that they live in a country where the meritocracy is broken. The meritocracy, now, it was broken to begin with, but at least it served at least the people at the top of the meritocracy 60, 70 years ago, 50, 60, 70 years ago, knew that the only way to sustain their level of wealth and their level of power over society was to throw breadcrumbs at the other people in the form of healthcare and welfare, basic safety nets, social security, workers' rights, just keeping the plebs quelled. They understood that was essential to, I mean, going into the in the 60s, the corporations in this country had basically made a mea culpa with the idea that, like, okay, the highest tax rate is going to be 90%. They had said, all right, we get it. Like, fine, we're gonna amass this big, insane pile of money, and after it gets big enough for us to never have to worry about money again, and us to have an insane amount of influence and power over American society, we will lop off 90% of the additional gains on top of that and throw it at stuff like providing people medical care and providing people food and providing people housing, because then they'll shut up. And for about 10 years, maybe 20, society in America was very much like society. Now, it was unspoken, and we didn't have these laws on the books, which was a mistake, but was very much like society currently is in places like Scandinavia or New Zealand, where you have a robust capitalist system an economy that is largely driven by the market, but there is an understanding that government's responsibility is to monitor that market and regulate that market. Because if you do not, then people become very quickly disenchanted with the way that you're running your government. And so people cannot reconcile the fact that Trump did not check all those boxes. He's an idiot. He's an idiot. And this man has been driven insane by the fact that he has been wealthy his entire life. He has gotten basically everything that he's ever wanted always. And that's driven him crazy. Now, that's not to say that in our current choice, Joe Biden is not a completely insane person. Of course he is. Of course. But people, especially the liberals and the Biden bots and Hillary bots that exist on your timelines, the reason that they can reconcile voting for Joe Biden, even if they don't agree with him on a basic level, because most of them post all day about how they want to feed and clothe people, and Joe Biden is like, I'm not going to do any of that. But the reason that they can get on the Biden boat, the Biden bus, and get out the vote for the guy is because he checks the meritocracy boxes, which makes them feel like there is some rhyme or reason to who becomes president in this country, when there is not any. Trump has proven that. Now, really, you could argue that Bush had proven it before, but because of the insanity of Trump, liberals in this country have made it their full-time job to rehabilitate the George W. Bush administration and tell us how, well, yeah, George W. Bush made some bad decisions, and, we're upset with how that worked out, but the reality is that he loved America, and he loved our troops, and he loved democracy. None of that shit's true. George W. Bush was a dishonorable, discharged, cokehead, scumbag, idiot, war criminal that history has completely forgiven in this society because we have the attention span of a goldfish, and he paints. And he happens to not like Trump. On paper. He loves Trump. In his bank account and in his politics, because Trump does all of the things that that Republicans want. He appoints the judges. He changes the tax code. He turns the knobs of immigration policy enough for them to be excited. George Bush, his dad when he was still alive, John McCain, Ted Cruz, all these people that claimed to not, well, I don't know about Trump. All those never Trump folks have either already come around, Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz come to mind, because he is doing what they want anyway. He just says the quiet part out loud, and that makes them feel uncomfortable. He says things like, folks, they're gonna destroy the suburbs. They're gonna destroy the suburbs. Which you would not say if you were Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz or George W. Bush. You would say something like, listen, we've got to make sure that there's law and order in American cities. It's still a little racist, but you would put a little gloss brush on it. Trump doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. And so publicly, they have to be like, well, I don't like him. Right? But the reality is, you have rehabilitated complete ghouls and goblins, like George W. Bush and Liz Cheney, for fuck's sake. I mean, let's not forget, the Cheney family literally threw their daughter, their own daughter, as hard as they could under the bus because she was a lesbian. And during the Bush administration, that Dick Cheney, we all know Dick Cheney was the little alien in George W. Bush's head running the whole thing, but George Bush went on national television, made a national address, interrupted 5 networks to give an hour-long national address on how we needed to legally define as a country marriage as between a man and a woman. And you could say, yeah, Hillary had that same position until like 2013. Joe Biden had that same position until like 2010. Barack Obama until like 2012. Yeah, that's all true. Absolutely. They're ghouls. Fine. But George W. Bush made it policy from the Oval Office. I mean, think about the things that have interrupted 5 network channels in a national address. We got Osama bin Laden. Coronavirus is killing everybody. And gay marriage. Dick Cheney's daughter was a lesbian. And they absolutely threw her under the bus. Absolutely threw her under the bus. To accelerate craven Republican policies and to further their political ambitions. Liz Cheney, you could argue that Liz Cheney is, well, no, there's no way around it. Liz Cheney is in office because she threw her daughter under the bus. And, oh my God, it's like my phone knew I was streaming. FBI Director Christopher Wray confirms Russia has made, quote, active efforts to influence the 2020 election. So this is what I wanted to get to on this stream. Because we went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But this is what I wanted to get to on this stream. It is time to take the black pill, folks. It is time to admit the fact that the left has lost. We have lost. And there is, I don't mean to be an alarmist, and I don't mean to be a pessimist by any means. But there is very little hope that we will win. Ever. Simply because if we do not win in the next 10 years, maybe 15, it will be too late. The world will be on fire. Sea levels will have risen to a point where it's not fixable. We might be able to get in and mitigate a little bit of the climate fallout that is going to befall us in the next 10 years. As far as, if the left wins in 20 years, maybe we're able to mass relocate people in major cities through democratic means. Maybe we're able to extract some of the hoarded wealth at the top of our psychopathic system in order to provide for people whose entire city has been wiped out by a 1,000-year flood or, a unprecedented fire or, a triple pound you in the ass tornado or whatever the hell. A cyclone, a tidal wave. Take your pick. Yosemite explodes, whatever. And there was a report that came out a few months ago from, I think it was in March, from the UK government, that the UK government commissioned their military to write a report surrounding the fallout of climate change and what the response should be from a military standpoint. And they considered that if global temperatures rise 2 degrees Celsius over the next 100 years, which is way, way, way going to happen. I mean, that's going to happen in the next 20 years, right? Then most of the UK will be underwater because it is an island. And their reaction to this is stating that there are going to be food shortages. There's going to be mass chaos because people will no longer be able to live where they live right now and will have to relocate into increasingly populous areas and increasingly crowded areas over time, which will lead to just massive amounts of chaos and economic despair, because a smaller and smaller amount of resources will have to be allocated to a larger and more dense population over time. And the response to this by the United Kingdom's military was not hey, now, actually, they do bring this up in the report. They say something to the effect of, well, we could take drastic steps to imagine our energy system and create a system where we're using clean energy sources, we are being less wasteful, we regulate the shit out of private industry so that they aren't able to pollute as heavily, and we could turn this ship around, or at least dramatically mitigate the amount of people that will suffer. But at the end of that paragraph, they talk about the fact that it's too expensive. There's no way to do it economically. They say, well, it's better. They actually make the calculation. This is nearly a direct quote. I don't have it in front of me, but this is nearly a direct quote. They make a calculation that it is actually better to sustain increasing GDP in the UK so that their citizens have the resources to deal with the fallout of climate change rather than dealing with climate change. So, in other words, they would rather gear their economy to perpetual growth and really just like put their foot on the gas on this thing and hoard as much money and resources as possible so that when climate fallout does happen, and they say by 2100, but who knows, right? I would be shocked if that's the first time. We're dealing with this right now, so I would be shocked if that's the first time that this comes into play and they have to employ these plans. But the idea being that if they can increase their economy exponentially and continue to destroy the earth and mine resources and allocate those resources to their people, then their people can respond to climate change by saying, well, at least I have the money to move my house, or at least I have the money to move inland or to mainland Europe or to America or whatever to get myself out of this insane fallout that we're dealing with because of the climate. Which is the stuff that apocalyptic end of world movies is made of. You're going to have a subset of people that have a shitload of resources that build their bunkers and their castles and all their bullshit and hire a private army. And you're going to have people scrounging for scraps. That is the situation that they are setting up. There's just no other way to look at that. And the reason that they are doing that is because they don't see how it can be economically feasible to stave off the end of society as we know it. Just think about that for a minute. I was having a conversation with a family member of mine when coronavirus kind of started. I mean, it was like March or April. It was right around the time that they passed the CARES Act and gave everybody $1,200, right? And this family member of mine, got their $1,200, and we were on the phone, and they said to me, well, this is nice and all, this is great, because they had been put out of work, and they were, in a tight spot. But they said, but I don't understand how we're going to pay for this. And I feel like this conversation will stick with me for the rest of my life. Because I just said, hey, how are they going to pay for it? Like, if we don't get this under control, this is the end of society. And I know that sounds dramatic, but if we do nothing, right? If we do nothing, if we had done nothing, we did a little something, but if we had done nothing, the numbers are 2 million people have to die. Necessarily 2 million people have to die in this country for us to achieve herd immunity. Can you imagine, almost 1% of the adult population in this country dying in a year? I mean, that's Avengers Snap type shit. everyone in this country would know someone personally who died. And that is the case in most developing nations. In most developing nations, everyone in that country knows someone personally who has died. Italy's a good example. Spain's a good example. And I just said to this family member of mine, this is the end of society if we don't get this under control. You know, what's $1,200? And they were like, well, yeah, but the whole bill's like $4 trillion or $3 trillion or whatever it was. And I said, okay, this shit is imaginary. This shit is completely imaginary. You know, people wouldn't be saying that if it was an asteroid. Right? Like, if we woke up tomorrow and the plot of Bruce Willis in Armageddon started to play itself out, and NASA came out and said, hey, there is a giant Texas-sized asteroid hurtling towards Earth, and if it makes impact, we will... First of all, you would have, you know, and say they said, and it'll be here in 90 days, right? First of all, you would have mass chaos, right? I mean, governments would shut down. You would have mass chaos. You would have looting and rioting that would, you know, hitherto unseen, right? But additionally, I'm at this place with America where you would have our representatives going, well, you know, we got to think, if we do solve this asteroid problem, we got to think about the deficit afterwards. You know, if NASA came up with a solution, like, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to launch a nuke at this asteroid. You know, Elon Musk and SpaceX are going to strap a nuke to a drone rocket, and we're going to shoot it at this asteroid. And if we hit it in a particular way, it will break up into pieces and we'll be fine. But it's going to cost $5 trillion to do this. You would have politicians in this country who would push the idea that the asteroid didn't exist before they would allocate that sort of money, because they're idiots. To them, the market and capitalism and money is the end all be all. It's the, you know, we have to think about the deficit. We have to think about people's taxes. And yes, this is not an extinction level event. COVID-19 is obviously, like, you know, it's not the bubonic plague or anything. We're not all going to turn into zombies and it's going to be the end of the world as we know it, of course. I'm just saying that we're getting a test run here. Like, we're getting a tryout of how prepared our governments are to provide for people in the event of a catastrophe, or at least an emergency. Now, in America, it's catastrophe. You know, nearly 250,000 people are dead. And probably 250,000 people are dead. We just don't have the ability to measure that. You know, our mortality rates, expected mortality rates are incredibly high. Meaning that deaths in this country are pretty easy to measure. You know, we have about the same number of people every year die in car accidents. We have about the same number of people every year die from heart disease or whatever. And so we can say that a certain number of people are going to die in the United States every year, regardless of what we do. That's just kind of a baseline number because humans are humans and that's what happens, right? And we're a society of 350 million people. And so with that many people knocking around, like, we know that a certain, you know, statistically, a certain amount of those people are going to die, right? But that number from 2019 to 2020 is going to skyrocket. And these are people that are dying at home. These are people that are dying without having the care of a doctor because either A, they are afraid to go to the hospital because we're in the middle of an insane pandemic, or they don't have health insurance because we don't provide that for people, or they have to work through being sick because they are an essential worker or they're a paycheck to paycheck person, which 40% of Americans say that they live paycheck to paycheck. And in the face of this, we're just leaving these people out to dry. And that is why, folks, it is time to take black pill. And what I mean by that is, in this country, there is a red pill that you can take, which devotes your life to, painting your pickup truck with President Trump's face, or flying a Trump flag in your front yard, or going to a no mask protest to own the libs, or whatever, right? Being Ben Shapiro, like, you take the red pill, that's the world you live in. There is a blue pill also, where you take the blue pill and you believe that Joe Biden is a competent leader that is able to string sentences together and put one foot in front of the other on a consistent basis, and could somehow sustain himself for 4 hours during a conversation with Joe Rogan and Trump. You also start to believe that the Russians have more of an influence over society than, or are interfering in our elections more, and that has more impact than disincentivizing people from voting, or disenfranchising people, or making regular people stand in line for 9-10 hours so that they can vote, which was a rampant problem in the primaries, Republican and Democrat. And you take that blue pill and you believe that Joe Biden is coming to save us, or Hillary Clinton is coming to save us, or Barack Obama did save us, and look at Trump messing it up. And then there is the black pill, ladies and gentlemen, which I think is the answer. And you take the black pill, you recognize that the left has utterly failed, because it has cannibalized itself to the point that there is no leader, there is no movement, there is just fragments of people yelling at each other online and posting about how you're not the correct amount of left because you think that Joe Biden would be better than Trump, or you think that Trump would be better than Biden because you're an accelerationist, or, the left can't agree on anything. The right, and, the red pill folks and the blue pill folks, they get right in line. They get right in line with the story. The story is Joe Biden's competent, fine. We'll post about that all day, and we'll talk about that all day with our friends. The red pill folks, Trump's awesome, Trump's saving the planet, Trump's going to expose the child trafficking cabal that runs the world, and the deep state, and they get right on the same page, and they all sound the same. The left is incapable of doing this because they want to appeal to everyone's identity and not offend anybody. And that is a weakness in the movement. That is a strategic error. So taking the black pill, I think we're like 45 minutes into this stream, and I'm finally telling you what this is. My bad. Taking the black pill entails understanding that the red pill folks and the blue pill folks are lost. They are lost. They are. They've already made their decision. They have decided to live in the matrix of their own choosing, and to hell with any outside information. That is 100% a lost cause. You can sit and argue and spend a insane amount of time trying to reconcile the idea that these people, or trying to fix these people, and it will not happen, because these people are trying. They are trying to reconcile the fact. One side of them is trying. Amazing. One side of them is trying to reconcile the fact that the meritocracy is broken because Trump is just good at being famous. He's not good at anything else, and he wiggled his way. He Harlem shaked his way all the way to the White House, and now is saying that he's never going to leave. And the other side is convinced that Trump is going to expose some sort of deep state, some sort of like international cabal of child sex traffickers and pedophiles and psychopaths that are the reason that your life is bad. and they can no longer reconcile that with reality because they have spent so much time blaming Russia or blaming Netflix or whatever the fuck, that for the reasons why their lives are materially bad, that they don't know an answer when it hits them in the face. And so these people are lost. And not to mention, if you try to get those people, right? If you have not taken one of these pills and you try to get a red pill person to come over to reality, then the blue pill people lose their mind because you are giving your platform to a racist, or you are rehabilitating a racist, or whatever the fuck. There is no room for redemption. And if you do that with the blue pill folks, then you are immediately a Democrat or a lib that needs owning, right? And so they will eat each other. They're just constantly, all it is just a culture war of insanity and a complete lost cause of two cannibalistic people who are trying to reconcile in their own mind why society is crumbling and why the American dream is dead and why there is no way for them to sustain themselves in a meritocratic way. And that's right and left, because the right has an idea of meritocracy that is much closer to the market is God and the market determines people's worth. The left is more about like, well, if you read the right books and make the right arguments and you look like the guys from the West Wing and you argue like Aaron Sorkin, then you should ascend to the highest levels of society. And that's not working, because all the people that are running society now are morons and brain dead boomers. And it's brain dead boomers all the way down. It's Trump, it's Pence, it's Pelosi, it's Schumer, it's brain dead boomers all the way down, probably to your local mayor. And yeah, so the black pill and how you live in that society is that you understand that those people are lost, and if you want to make any sort of a political movement out of anything, you do not care about what those people say, because they are going to do their thing and manifest their matrix regardless. They are going to I made this point yesterday. The blue pill people are going to tell you that you can't promote any sort of socialism or social democracy, because the red pill people will call you a socialist and scare all the old people away. Well, they're going to do that anyway, because they've been doing that for 100 years, and they're going to continue doing that. They're always going to do that, and who cares what the old people say? Because the old people are never, they took the red pill, most of them, already. So who cares? And taking the black pill is understanding that any room for political growth and any chance to maintain society as we know it and stave off the apocalypse, right? Wow, I just realized I have a map, a mat on my desk, like a desk mat, I guess, that is a map of the world, and I just realized that Israel is on it and not Palestine. Wow. Anyway, yeah. So taking the black pill requires you to say, okay, I'm no longer concerned about what the Biden bots and the Hillary folks and the Trumpists and all them and the Ted Cruz people and the Tom Cotton people. I don't care. I don't care. They've already made their decision that they are lost. And focusing your political energy and your effort and your movement creation and your mobilizing of people on people who have not taken a pill yet, people who have not decided to live within a matrix of their own creation yet. And that would require actually doing politics, which people don't want to do. That would require knocking on strangers' doors and talking to them about issues. That would require phone banking for a candidate. That would require having difficult conversations with people that you don't know very well. And a lot of people want to be online and say that they want actual change and say that they want policies that align with the left, whatever the left is in America. But they don't want them bad enough to do any of that actual work. They want them bad enough to post about it. They want them bad enough to stream about it. But they don't want them bad enough to do the actual work. En masse. And before you say, well, Kyle, you're just streaming about it, you're not going out and doing those things, you're right. You are absolutely correct. And the reason for that is that no one is. And so, what difference does it make? Right? Like, until the movement, and whether that be whatever the hell comes out of Black Lives Matter, or whatever the hell comes out of Antifa, or whatever the hell comes out of the left, right? Like the actual left in this country, until they recognize the fact that you have to build an infrastructure with money and resources and actual staff and actual real organization, unionization, until they realize that that's the way to move this thing forward, rather than just, and I'm all for the protesting, but rather than just throwing a fit in the street. You know, you want to throw a fit in the street for a while? Okay. But then you got to move people. You got to use that energy, because the media will move on. You know, there was an amount of time there where people were like, yeah, protests. Even the media was like, yeah, protests. And now, because it's gone so long without you doing any actual movement politics, because there's so much stagnation in our political process, now it's just a cudgel that the right uses to beat us with. And so, blackpill yourself. Recognize that if you are hearing the sound of my voice, then you are probably way more informed about the actual material conditions of people in this country than anyone in elected office. Literally anyone. And that includes Bernie. That includes AOC. That includes Elizabeth Warren. That includes Ilhan Omar. Rashida Tlaib. Although they are the closest, I guess. These people that I'm listing. Maybe not Elizabeth Warren. But, you know, it is a lost cause to try and break people loose of their, because both sides have bought into conspiracies. This is going to be the problem come election time. You know, November. Is there are some models out that say, you know, the American public, right? We're consumers first. So the way that we digest the election is we're going to turn on the TV, the vast majority of us, is we're going to turn on the TV on November 4th or 3rd, or I don't know what day's election day. On election day, you know, we're all going to go to our jobs and have our regular days on election day, and some of us will vote. But then we're going to come home and we're going to turn on our TVs and we are going to watch the returns or our internet services or whatever the hell we watch for our news consumption. And we're going to watch the returns. And because the American people are consumers first and foremost, we are going to want an answer. We are going to want somebody to go, Trump won or Biden won. And it is looking increasingly more and more like that's not going to happen. Because the 3 states that are going to determine the election, barring any sort of weirdness, it's Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Those are the three states. Did I say countries? The 3 states that are going to determine this election. And those 3 states all have laws on the books that say it is illegal to count mail-in ballots before Election Day. And we already know, everybody can just assume, that we are going to have a record level of mail-in ballots. We're going to have a record level of people who don't want to go to the polls because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so they are going to request an absentee ballot and mail in their vote. And so it could look, there are models out there that say on election night, you could be looking at a projection of Trump with 405 electoral votes. You need 270 to win. And Joe Biden with 110. Now, once they count all the votes, which will take, I don't know, in the primaries, it took like 3 weeks to count the votes in California. Now, once you count all the votes and you figure out the electoral math that goes with those votes, it will look like or it will become reality that Biden won, probably. Like, just looking at the polls. Looking at the data as we have it right now. If the election were held today, Biden would win, and I would assume that that's going to bear out because you're going to have record turnout, but you're going to have record mail-in ballots. I'm still like 51-50 Biden's going to win, or 51-49 Biden's going to win. But who knows, right? Like, we're in the season finale of America, so anything could happen. But the point being, you are going to see, because both factions live in, because red pill and blue pill people live in an insane conspiracy reality, you are going to see, if Trump wins, the blue pill people will go, well, it was Russia, and we're not accepting this, or it was voter fraud because he was telling people to vote twice, or he was discouraging people from mail-in voting, and there's a pandemic, and this is not a legitimate election. And they're going to lose their minds. But if Biden wins, it will be under the circumstances of what I just described, which is Trump is winning on election night, bigly, and then 3 weeks later they overturn the results in the eyes of the American people. Yeah. People are, and then the red pill people, who are very armed, are going to think, and rightfully so, in my mind, that the media and the deep state, or whatever, whoever the villain is, the Democrats, stole the election back. And these two factions are finally going to reach a point of conflict. And like I said, there is one side of those people that are heavily, heavily armed and already primed, already ready to get in the streets and be violent, because their Lord and Savior and leader has told them that that's what has to happen on multiple occasions. And so we are looking at a situation where these conspiracies are going to come to a head. And the outcome of that conflict is either going to be violence leading to actual fascism, because then if Trump loses the election but maintains the office, which I don't know how he would do that. I don't know legally how he would do that. But if he loses the election, okay, let me rephrase. If he loses the election and then there is insane violence in the street, and the only way to put it down is to, I don't know, throw out the mail-in votes, or because he's making the case that they're fraudulent, or hold the election again, or impanel the Supreme Court or something to make, which is wildly conservative, to make some sort of decision, and then Trump ends up staying in office, then no election for the rest of America will ever be legitimate again. And the same thing if the Biden people do the same thing. Except if in this conflict, if the Biden people win, and which is very unlikely, because they're mostly just like, we have to uphold the decency in this country, and we're all about the process. And so we need to make sure that we have respect for, the process. They're never going to really push this thing. And even if they did, they've ceded so much ground in the courts and on the legislative level that who cares? Who's going to back them up? Bernie? One guy with no power? Who's going to back them up? Chuck Schumer? Nancy Pelosi? No. No, 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 no. No, no, no. Supreme Court sure isn't. The only variable there being that I think that the Supreme Court is starting to realize that either they moderate and tack towards the, whatever we call the insane middle in this country, or the next Democratic president is going to pack the court. And they don't want to lose that sort of power by putting, another 9 judges on the court or something like that and balancing it out. So instead, they're just going to curtsy and be like, well, sorry. But if by some way they didn't, then we're going to just plunge into full neoliberal capitalism porn that is literally just going to be like, hey, listen, the Democrat won, that's great, so what we're going to do is just abolish driving in this country and just turn it over to Uber. Or, we'll abolish the USPS and turn it over to Amazon because it's more efficient. Or whatever the hell. Or, Social Security is really not keeping up with the times, so let's privatize it and make it and tie it to the stock market. Because they will have, the will of the people to do anything because they beat Trump. And so we will just plunge in anything about anything at all. Now, granted, I think that Joe Biden will probably pass some climate legislation. He'll probably do, we'll probably see DC statehood, which would increase the leverage that the left has because, Washington, D.C., fairly liberal in the voting population, not the people that live, not the elites that live there, but the voting population. And you could see sort of a light Green New Deal, I suppose. Like, hey, we're going to build a, I could very much see Joe Biden coming out with like we're going to build a nationwide train system or something like that. And that's his Green New Deal plan. And it never gets off the ground because it gets mired in Republicans screaming that it's too much money or whatever the hell. And then, they back off and they make it like, we're going to invest heavily in people's education so that if they go to school and learn to drive a train, we'll give them a tax credit. It'll be some bullshit half measure that'll never work. And, but that being said, from the left, I would rather have to argue with Joe Biden than have to argue with Trump. Because at least if you're arguing with Joe Biden, you can say things like, bro, aren't you a Democrat? Like, what? Like, you say you care about this stuff, and here's how you actually manifest that caring. Like hilariously, Nancy Pelosi tweeted yesterday, and I've gone a little long here, so I'm gonna get off after this. But Nancy Pelosi tweeted yesterday that she tweeted a photo of the fires in California, right? Which she is the representative of the district that is on fire. And that had like 130-degree temperatures last week before the fire. She is the actual representative from that place and the Speaker of the House. And she tweeted something like, the fires on the West Coast are a catastrophe, and she said, we have to move to take science seriously, and yeah, we have to take science seriously and listen to the experts and do something about this. And the way that you know that people are not buying the bullshit anymore, and why I think Biden is in trouble, honestly, is because all of the replies to that tweet, you could just scroll for pages and pages and pages. All the replies to that tweet were like, aren't you the Speaker of the House? Aren't you like the third most powerful person in the United States? Couldn't you do something about it? Like, what are you talking about? Somebody needs to do something about this. And she did that with when Trump deployed the federales or whatever to smack people on the head when they were protesting. Or when he deployed like the National Guard and they were doing secret arrests in Portland and shit like that. She was tweeting videos about that and being like, this is unacceptable. Something has to be done. Yeah, something does. And you are the person to do it. Like, unfortunately, you don't, like, tweeting is not doing anything. I just found that particularly funny. And I think that it really shows that, like, people are disenchanted. People are disenchanted by the amount of power that politicians yield in this country. Like Trump's town hall the other night. I just saw the highlights from it. I could not find the strength to watch the whole thing. But his town hall the other night, people were angry. Like you could tell. The journalist George Stephanopoulos was the guy running it, and he was pretty like, Mr. President, given the fact that you're awesome, just by virtue of you being president, I'm sure that you feel bad about what's going on with coronavirus, right? Like, those were the kind of questions that he was asking, and even with those little like lobs, Trump was still like, I don't feel bad at all. I don't feel bad at all. I think we crushed it. We crushed it. In fact, I didn't downplay it. I upplayed it, folks. I if anything, I just didn't want to alarm people. I'm a cheerleader. I'm a cheerleader for this country. I mean, he didn't even take the softballs well. It was a disaster. But anyway, people who got up in the audience, a very sparse audience in a very large auditorium, the people who were allowed to get up and ask questions were angry. I mean, they were mad. They were pissed off at his answers. There was one guy. I mean, can you imagine Trump getting this question when he ran originally? There was a guy, a black guy, that stood up and said, "Sir, while you've been running for re-election, you've been talking about making America great again or keeping America great. When was America great for black people in this country? And can you see how that would be alienating to black people? That you just keep saying, make America great again, hearkening back to a time where it wasn't great for black people." And Trump just goes, and first of all, ow, burn. Like, God, imagine having to field that question on national television. Imagine if, like, we lived in regular society and, like, George Bush had to field that question. Or Bill Clinton had to field that question. I mean, it would be front page news for weeks and weeks and weeks. Because that's an own. But Trump just goes, well, listen, if you look at my polling numbers with black people, they love me. We're going up. People have never seen anything like this before. That we're winning the black vote. We're going to get a bigger piece of the black vote than anyone has ever gotten on the Republican side, and I'm very proud of that. That was his answer for that. It was a disaster. And it was mostly a disaster because he had to deal with regular people. I mean, can you imagine being a regular... Now, granted, he's having to deal with regular people through the filter of CNN. Right? I mean, because CNN's going to... I think it was CNN. Maybe it was... it was ABC. Going through the filter of ABC. And so, like, those questions are going to be screened. They're not going to really let people, like, go off. But... So... Even in those parameters, people were pissed off. Several questions about, like, hey, man, like, you knew this was a big deal. We've got you on tape saying that this was a big deal, and you didn't do anything. And his answer was the same answer he always gives, which people are starting to get annoyed with. Even people that are like on the fence are starting to get annoyed with, which is like, well, I closed the border to China. China. Closed the border. Closed it. And that saved thousands of lives. When in reality, a mask mandate would have saved thousands of lives. Locking down and providing for people materially, and then using the time that we were locked down, say a month or two, to invest heavily in mask production, test production, rapid testing, contact tracing, quarantining. You know, had he done that, you know, and of course, COVID-19 is a natural phenomenon. It is not Trump's fault, right? But his response, because of the way that American politics work, people are not going to see that as a failure of the Democrats to negotiate properly, which it was, or a failure of the Republicans to in the Senate and the House to give a shit about normal people over and above how they feel about the stock market, which it was. They are going to just blame Trump because he's the guy. They are going to blame the guy who is driving the boat, even if it was the dudes in the bottom of the boat, like throwing coal into the ovens, that caused the problem. Or even if it was the navigator up in the little tower thing that caused the problem. They are going to blame the captain. So, I take the black pill, folks. Recognize that the way to save the planet and our democracy is to move people who are not involved, who have not engulfed a political party into their personal identity. Those are the only people that you're going to get, and that's going to mean doing actual hard work. And we don't have a lot of time. You know, a decade, maybe two, to completely revolutionize this country. I mean, not tinker around the edges, but to completely level the way that things are done right now because it's not working, and rebuild a new system like the New Deal. And it can be done. But the dinosaurs in charge are not going to do it. It is going to require a lot of work. A lot of work. So, we got there. There will be more. Because I'm picking the scab that is this black pill mentality and trying to wrap our heads around how it connects to moving the left forward. Because, like I said, you're not going to move the left forward by throwing a fit in the street. You're going to have to move people by actually moving them. Taking people to the polls. Supporting down-ballot politicians, not just doing presidential politics. You know, really communicating with people, not just posting. So, peace. See you